And one of the judges, as he was tasting one of the white wines, held it up, raised the glass, took a sip, smelled it, and said, back to France. And Tabor looked at his scorecard and realized that the judge had just tasted Freemark Abbey from Napa Valley.
So the mid-'60s were sort of the bottom of the wine culture in California. That's really interesting. So what do you think happened between, well, you said earlier that Californians' palates didn't really like the type of wine that was being produced. So what do you think changed between then and then, bottoming out in the 60s and then this quality jumping to the point that it could win a French wine competition, a world wine competition in the mid-'70s?
I mean, we're talking, 30, 40 years. So it's not something that is just, one thing. It's a series of things probably. And, as I don't really have a lot of insight into, how much people were drinking beer versus wine in the 60s or whiskey or rum. But it's, things would fluctuate. And it, we had a number of ups and downs that would get us up to, and 350, I mean, right now we have 4,800 wineries. So we ended up, after, the year 2000, more than 70 or 80% of the wineries that exist today started in the last 25 years. I mean, we're having, the wine industry, again, is going through quite a bit of a decline as a result of Gen Zers not drinking as much, climate change, or if Gen Zs are drinking, they're drinking, a variety of cocktails instead of wine or beer. And so, the peak, I think, was around 2017. And then we would see a little bit of a blip of wine drinking or a little rise during COVID lockdown. And then since then, it's been on the decline ever since. But it's nothing, the decline is nothing compared to what it was like in the 60s and 70s, where we only had 350 wineries. Now, we still have 4,800. I mean, a lot of the wineries now they are having, a lot of challenging times, and probably don't like saying that, things are much better than they were compared to the 70s. But, it's, 4,800 is a lot more than 350.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, I remember, as I mentioned, growing up in the Napa Valley, being around wineries all the time. But, in recent years, when I would return there and see the number of wineries that have sprouted up all over the place, I would even ask myself, well, how can the economy support? Are there that many people drinking wine?
Right.
So it's probably natural it should contract a bit again. But what about your family? So how did they manage to get through this difficult period and then kind of reach that pinnacle in terms of the wine world?
Yeah, I mean, it is a fascinating history and story. I mean, a lot of it is, so as I mentioned earlier, that my great-grandfather had 18 acres of Zinfandel grapes in the 1930s. But by 1940, he ended up selling off part of that vineyard. And he would end up, my grandfather, Grandpa Mario, ended up taking over the wine business, the day-to-day operations. My great-grandfather stayed on he was semi-retired. But, you know, even in those times, Mountain View, we had, NASA being built out there. And, it was not nearly what it is today in terms of real estate, but it was growing. At one point, I think they had 3,000 residents, and then within 5 years, they'd be up to 5,000 residents. And so it just made economic feasible sense for my great grandfather to sell off or use part of his orchard for other purposes, and then he could buy his grapes from other vineyards in the area, in Cupertino and Saratoga, and the like. So it's the early days of being a savvy real estate investor, kind of.
That's interesting. They makes me think of that movie about, I guess, Ray Kroc, the guy that built McDonald's into such a big,
right? The founder.
The founder. Yeah, exactly. That movie. And the whole thing was not so much what he did with hamburgers, but what he did with real estate.
Right. Yeah. So it's interesting because my Grandpa Mario didn't really talk about his real estate, but every now and then we would see, he passed away in 2005, or I'd read, some old newspaper clipping in the San Jose Mercury News that he was a part owner of some property, in the San Francisco Peninsula. And my grandmother, who actually is still alive at 104 years old, she never really liked to know about the business dealings. Not that she just was disinterested. It wasn't like anything was shady. It was just that she just didn't care. And so even though, and I spent a lot of time with her during the pandemic lockdown, because we had to lay off her caregiver until we got a vaccine. So, but, I would spend a lot of time going through old newspaper clippings, and I would ask her certain things. And if it was business related, she really didn't have much insight into that she could share with me.
Now, we talk about this judgment in Paris is such a huge thing for California wines. I'm assuming that until that time, California wines were not winning competitions. Is that right?
So they had, my grandfather would have a lot of local or California state wine events. I don't think that there were. Well, I guess every number of years, at the World Fair, they probably had them. Because I know in 1915, when the World Fair came to San Francisco for the celebrating the opening of the Panama Canal, a number of California wines won that tasting. As far as international tastings, I don't have a lot of insight into that. I know that Rixford, which was a very popular woodside winery, and at the turn of the 20th century, they won the Paris the Paris gold medal at the Paris World Fair, I think in 1900. And so I don't have a lot of, I haven't come across a lot of international tastings. It doesn't mean that they didn't win or they didn't have them. But after 1976, I mean that it just became a huge ordeal.
So, what do you think was the impact then of that judgment?
Well, everybody was intrigued with California wine after that. I mean, you can go into George Tabor. In fact, we talk about that judgment in Paris a little bit because it was really fascinating how it all came about, and it almost didn't get any publicity whatsoever. So it was run by a guy named Stephen Spurrier, who was he ran a Paris wine shop, and he was looking for a way to promote his wine shop. And he was often hosting, it was located near a lot of the foreign embassies in Paris. And they would have special tastings inviting the embassy members of the embassy, of the foreign embassies, to taste their own wines. And he had a business partner named Patricia Gallagher, who was actually from the U.S. She was from Delaware. And Stephen Spurrier, if I hadn't mentioned it yet, he was a British expat.
Okay.
He previously worked in the British wine trade. And then he ended up taking over the Caves de Madeleine, which is an interesting story, but we can come back to that.
Yeah, let's come back to it.
And so Patricia Gallagher, who ran the French wine school next door, went off to California on vacation. She did a number of wine tastings, came back and told Stephen Spurrier that we have to do a California tasting. And Stephen Spurrier said, I'm not opposed to it, but we need a raison d'être. We need a reason to do it. We need a marketing angle. And she goes, well, it's a no-brainer. We got to do it for the bicentennial and American independence. Stephen Spurrier said, well, she said, it's a big deal. And Stephen Spurrier said, is it? We never celebrated in England, having lost the war. But Stephen Spurrier wasn't one to ignore a marketing opportunity. And so sure enough, he went along with it. And so he pitched the story idea to a number of French media, Le Monde, L'Express, Le Figaro, and they all universally rejected the story idea, figuring that if France is going to win the tasting, there's no story. And he also pitched it to George Tabor, the European correspondent of Time, and he was also skeptical, but he was familiar with the wine shop because he had taken a wine course at the wine school next door. So a couple of things fell into place to make it work or make it worth his while to attend it. It was actually it was going to be held on the slowest news day of the week. It was held on Monday. Time magazine went to print on Fridays. And so if nothing came out of that event, it wasn't a big loss to Tabor. So he shows up there and not expecting a story to come out of it. And it was about halfway through the white wine tasting that he started to realize that a story was actually brewing. And since he was fluent in French, he knew what all the French judges, there were 9 French judges, what they were saying. And they talked a lot during the tasting. And he had, worked in Europe for 7 years, so he was fluent in French. And Spurrier gave him a scorecard and a list of the wines that they were drinking. And so he was one of the few people who knew what was being tasted. And one of the judges, as he was tasting one of the white wines, held it up, raised the glass, took a sip, smelled it, and said, back to France. And Tabor looked at his scorecard and realized that the judge had just tasted Freemark Abbey from Napa Valley.
Wow.
And so that's when he realized that there was probably a story here after all. And so, sure enough, Stag's Leap won the Cabernet category, the red category, and Chateau Montelena ended up winning the white wine category.
Wow, that's interesting. I did not know that, especially the tie-in with the bicentennial.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're at 50 years later,
mm-hmm.
and the wine industry, the wine culture is completely different. American wines are huge. And how did that affect your family?
So, an interesting story. I could tell you a story about how this really kind of, that the Judgment of Paris is probably part of what influenced my cousins, the Obisters, that ended up going into the wine business and ended up buying the Gemello wine label from my grandfather when he retired, 1982. But how they got into the wine business is a fascinating story that is probably, a great little nugget right after Judgment of Paris. And because they ended up running what was considered a boutique winery, one of the, as boutique wineries started to explode in the late 70s and 1980s. And in the early 1970s, my great-grandfather had just lost his wife of 70 years. And so they met in Italy. In fact, when they were kids, they were 12 and 13 years old, and then ended up getting married, in their, I think, early 20s. And she passed away, I think, in 72 or 73. And so Sandy and Paul Obister, who Sandy was John Gemello's granddaughter, she ends up taking him in, and they had a house in Palo Alto. And my great-grandfather was pretty depressed from losing his wife, but also he was, he was long retired, but also he had one of his hobbies was gardening. And sometime in his 80s, he had a pitchfork incident, where a self-imposed pitchfork incident. Might kind of sound like Wheeler, but Wheeler was not self-imposed. But he struck his knee and injured it. And over time, it got worse and worse. Knee replacement surgery wasn't popular at the time. That would have done wonders for him. But so it was hard for him to get on his knees and play in the dirt and do his gardening. So Sandy was often trying to come up with ways to inspire him. And one day she and Paul said, Grandpa, why don't you show us how to make a barrel of wine? And he was intrigued by that, but he said, well, let me think about it. A couple months go by, and Paul ends up bringing up the topic again. And he goes, okay, so, and in his broken English, he's like, first you get a ton of grapes. And Paul goes, no, I just want to make a barrel. We don't need to make a whole massive amount. And he goes, well, I only know one way. Paul goes, that's okay. I know how to divide by 2. Go ahead and tell me your recipe. And so for 2 years in a row, they made some homemade wine. And then in 77 or 78, they ended up going out and looking for a property to launch their own winery. And they ended up buying an old barn in Half Moon Bay. right off of 92 and Highway 1. And that became they converted that barn into a winemaking operation, which would be there for 25 years.
So Half Moon Bay is about, what, half hour, 40 minutes south of San Francisco? Is that right?
Yeah, about that. Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, no problem. So, and then in that was 78. 1982 is when my grandfather Mario retired, and he sold the wine label, and he taught them his recipe for his Cabernet for basically red wine. And then they would continue to make. They made Oberster predominantly throughout that era, but I think they made about 500 cases of Gemello, Cabernet, and Zinfandel during that era. They also purchased some land in Mendocino, I think in 1990, and that would be they moved their winemaking operation there it would be there for about 6 years, and then they ended up selling it to Duckhorn, which is a very popular wine brand. It was actually Goldeneye was the vintage or the wine that they produced out of that Mendocino property under the Duckhorn umbrella. It's still in operation.
Oh, great! That's great.
So, yeah.
So then, you said that there was another story that you wanted to mention that had to do with the judgment. That.
Yeah. So I think. So there's a couple of good stories. I don't remember exactly which one I was going to tell at that point, but basically,
doesn't matter.
It's interesting how. It's interesting how. Oh yeah, it is this story on how Spurrier ended up buying Cavs de Madeleine.
There we go.
So he was in his early 20s or mid 20s. He had just moved, him and his wife, to France. And like I think I mentioned earlier, he was in the London wine trade for 2 years before he came over. And he was walking around one day in Paris with a lawyer friend of his, also a British expat. And they walked by the Cavs de Madeleine, and Stephen Spurrier said, that's the kind of shop I'd like to own someday. So they walk into the wine shop, and
Cavs de Madeleine is a wine shop, is a well-known wine shop. Okay,
right. And so they walk into the wine shop, and they bump into the owner, and she says, "Can I sell you something?" And the lawyer says, "Yeah, you could sell your shop to my friend." And she kind of laughs and says, "I don't. This is my husband's pride and joy, and I don't think you can hold a candle to, an Englishman can hold a candle to my husband, who he had passed away 2 years earlier. And she was actually secretly trying to sell the wine shop." And so, Stephen Spurrier, he wasn't hurting for money. He came from a wealthy family. So, he said to the lady and said, "Look, I'm willing to strike a deal with you. I'm willing to work for you for free for 6 months to learn the Paris wine trade. And if you're satisfied after 6 months, you can sell it to me." So he ended up working there for 6 months. And then in April of 1971, he sold him the shop.
Wow. And is that the shop that became the shop where they held the competition, the judgment in Paris?
No, I don't believe it was held at the shop. I think it was held at a hotel. I've read that, but I don't recall which hotel it was held at.
Okay. Yeah, but I mean, it was through his shop there.
Yeah.
That shop that he organized it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think this... No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, he did a number of things to change the the wine shop. She was selling inexpensive wines, catering to the locals, and his idea was to cater to the wealthy foreigners that worked nearby, because all the foreign embassies were nearby. There were a lot of big law firms that were nearby, and he just saw that as a huge opportunity to increase the value. And also, as he's told the story, he passed away in 2021, but over the years he's done a lot of interviews, and he mentioned that there weren't a lot of the French didn't speak English in the 1970s in Paris, and so he ended up taking out an ad in the International Herald Tribune saying that your wine merchant speaks English. And so that's one way that he was trying to build a clientele of expats and wealthy foreigners that were living in Paris at the time.
Wow. So what would you say that this episode, this famous Judgment in Paris, can teach us about California, about California's relationship with wine and the rest of the world?
I mean, it's definitely, I think one of the reasons why it's a really fascinating story is it's a cultural turning point, but it's also a California underdog story where, internationally it was not very well respected, partly because of Prohibition. And, during Prohibition, the schools that did teach viticulture, UC Davis and Fresno State, which actually they weren't called those universities at the time, but they're still around, they stopped teaching viticulture. And so there was a massive loss of knowledge. So a lot of the winemakers at that time either went to other countries or went into completely different industries. And so we lost a lot of knowledge. And so, it's, I don't know, I just think it's a fascinating and exciting underdog story that who doesn't love an underdog story?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you. Are there any other stories that you think we need to hear or that we've left out in this episode?
I think we pretty much covered it. I mean, one of the fascinating stories, if we go back to Prohibition, is about A.P. Giannini and the guy who started Bank of Italy. And Bank of Italy really initially it catered to the Italian farming community, immigrant farming community. He got his start working, delivering vegetables in a horse-drawn wagon as well, similar to my great-grandfather. And in 1930, he was one of the, after the 1929 market crash happened, and then there was another double whammy, you may say, regarding a lot of the farming community, where there was a massive harsh winter freeze that went across Santa Clara Valley and pretty much wiped out my grandfather's vegetable business for a while. And so he ended up going to Bank of Italy. And one of the things that he did, A.P. Giannini did to cater heavily to the Italian immigrant community, he posted the hours both in Italy in Italian and in English. And so my great-grandfather got a loan for two purposes. He got a loan for money to live on for that year, but also to buy a new tractor. And he used that tractor in the mornings on his own property, and then he would rent it out for to other people for extra cash. And in 1930, A.P. Giannini, really perfected the banking business using the Italian immigrant community as a model, and then he started to branch out to other ethnicities, such as the Chinese and so forth. And in late 1930, he ended up rebranding the bank. Do you know the name? Bank of America.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the few banks that would survive in the banking crash of the Great Depression. And one of the ways that he did that is that he brought interest rates close to zero. And then he got the contract to, or he gave a $2 million loan to an engineer who was going to build the Golden Gate Bridge. And a stipulation for that loan would be that he had to use a lot of the Italian immigrants that were out of work.
Very interesting. Clever. I had no idea.
Yep. Yeah.
That's well. See, it's funny to see how all of these. You take one episode, one story, and it's tied into so many others.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, but I think that's the great thing about history is beyond the facts and figures. It is really story, right? And one story leads to another and is connected to another, and usually, in many cases, there's also a personal connection that we can find, right? As in the case of your family. So I really want to thank you, and we'll definitely add the URLs for your work. I know you have a newsletter on Substack. Am I correct?
Yeah. If anybody is interested in these stories, I often write many of these stories and behind the scenes research and stories for an upcoming book that I'm working on. My Substack, if you'd like to subscribe to my Substack, you can find it. It's called the Centenarian Playbook. It's partly about the Gemello Winery, but also about my Grandma Kay's longevity journey at 104 years old. Centenarian Playbook or gemello.substack.com.
All right. Well, we'll definitely let everybody know that. And I want to thank you. This was really interesting and a great glimpse into a world event that really has a direct connection to our history here in California. So
awesome. I really appreciate it, Damian. It was a lot of fun retelling these stories and learning about you as well.
All right. Well, if you have any other stories, you just let me know and we'll bring you back on.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the California Frontier Show. If you'd like to support the show, the best thing to do is to let other people know about it. If you'd like to support it monetarily, there are a couple ways of doing that. One is by scrolling down in your podcast app to where it says support the show. There you can become a subscriber for as little as $3 a month. And if you want to give a one-time donation, just below you'll see where it says give a one-time donation. Finally, the show is supported by California History Teachers, which is a full year of lessons for 4th grade California history and social studies. You can find out more at www.californiahistoryteachers.com. And if you input the coupon code PODCAST, you'll receive 25% off your monthly or annual subscription. So check it out.